therapy with drumming. My name is Samantha Bias, and this is for MHS 541 with Dr. G. The project description is as follows. This course is designed for veterans who suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. The course offers drumming as an alternative therapy as supplement to traditional medicine in the treatment of PTSD and the discovery of emotional triggers and developing techniques to manage these triggers based on each veteran's needs. Some of the learning obstacles that could present themselves are many veterans may not be receptive to a new type of therapy as they become accustomed to traditional medicine practices and wish to rely on pharmaceutical treatment for their PTSD. There is the possibility that the veteran may feel intimidated by joining the course due to lack of musical inclinations. So this may act as a deterrent to try something that is potentially foreign to them. Lastly, some veterans may not wish to open up in front of others about their PTSD triggers and the actions that can occur in the aftermath. Some of the problems that exist within the current Veterans Health Administration is they don't have an existing method of alternative therapy for veterans who are dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder, so they're using traditional pharmaceutical medications that a lot of veterans are becoming dependent on. And what's currently taking place with learners, or what I would like to see take place, is for veterans to be able to move away from traditional pharmaceutical intervention and mental health counseling, because there's just not an adequate amount. So not only are the VAs overwhelmed and not able to get our veterans the appropriate amount of mental health care that they need, but they're pumping them full of traditional pharmaceuticals that they're, of course, becoming addicted to, and when those stop working, then they move on to other drug methods like opiates, heroin. So the point of this is to gear away from that issue. I've spoken with a lot of veterans and have received a lot of verbal feedback from them that they are looking for different methods of dealing with their post-traumatic stress disorder because they don't want to become addicts. They don't want to have to rely on the medications that are provided by the Veterans Health Administration and trying to get the mental health that they do need. One of the changes that I see this taking place is in a relaxed clinical setting where they are with other veterans that suffer from the same thing. So they have that commonality, and it's away from the stale and stagnant healthcare setting. Instruction would be appropriate intervention to solve this problem, because veterans who come home from war and they're diagnosed with PTSD, again, that initial solution is to prescribe antipsychotic medication and counseling with mental health professionals that are not adequately trained to better the mental welfare of a soldier with PTSD. So the proposed instruction would be to provide veterans with an alternative therapy using drumming as not only a release, but as a means to demonstrate emotion, which is something that's worth exploring in an attempt to provide veterans with a different set of coping mechanisms where their PTSD is triggered. Our task analysis essentially begins with needing a learner that's going to be open-minded and wants to try an alternative therapy for treating their PTSD and learning how to manage their triggers. There's not going to be a need for any prior knowledge of music, abilities. Learners are going to learn drumming or essentially it's not even a learning process, but just tapping on things that until they find the beat that works for them, that helps them concentrate and pull the internal emotions from a trigger event away. Give it another focus. And they can use any surface. They can use their feet stomping on the floor. They can use their hands drumming on a desk or a book or a metal container. Anything, as long as it's not self-destructive. And I've included a flowchart as an example of what the key steps would be involved in the task and in the sequence they would go. And I'll explain that a little bit here in the next slide. And to determine if the learner is able to complete the task, the success of the learner is going to be dependent upon their open mindset and their willingness to learn a new coping skill for their PTSD triggers. If the veteran comes in and they've got an attitude and they're not willing, they're not going to gain any useful skills. And we don't want that hostile attitude. We want to help veterans thrive and grow and learn how to manage their triggers without relying on pharmaceutical intervention. As I mentioned on the previous slide, kind of the flow of how things would go, of course, would be the start of the course, and we would be interviewing potential veterans or others who suffer from PTSD for the music therapy class, and we would determine how does the veteran have PTSD. If it's no, would the veteran still like to participate? And if they don't, we can refer them to a qualified mental health specialist that may be able to assist them. But if they do want to move on, the veteran would have to be receptive to alternative therapy. And if they are, then we would enroll that veteran or participant into the music therapy with drumming. There would be a meet and greet. And we would learn how to recognize triggers and how each veteran currently responds. We would go through the history of drumming, because history of drumming goes all the way back to the drums of war before any of us can possibly imagine. We would hand out drums, begin with some simple beats, and then graduate to various tempos and rhythms based on the veteran's emotions or the participant's emotions. And then practice releasing those triggers with drumming through learned techniques. Triggers can be anything from sounds, sights, smells. It can be a variety of things. Thunder, dogs barking, kids screaming, the smell of smoke, electrical burning smells, the vision of actual war scenes itself from things like movies. And then the veterans are going to begin to recognize their triggers and how to get them under control prior to a full-blown release of violence or negative self-destructive behaviors. And the whole goal is to provide veterans who have PTSD or other mental health disorders this alternative therapy to supplement the traditional medicine so that there is less reliance on possible addiction, abuse, crime, and other issues that currently plague many of our veterans. Learner analysis. So some of the expected age ranges are from 25 to 40. However, there are veterans that are slightly older, considering that we still have Korean conflict veterans that are still alive, as well as some WW2, but they're a little bit more uncommon. So the range could actually age anywhere from 18, which is the enlisted age, to age 80, again, because that's the span of living veterans that currently suffer from PTSD. And the typical gender is going to be primarily men, because that makes up 95% of males with war trauma related PTSD. Women are in the 5% range of military veterans who suffer from PTSD. And based on studies, issues with war trauma PTSD is handled better by women as opposed to men. And the range of educational background would be a minimum of either a high school diploma or GED, because those are the guidelines for being able to enlist in any of the military branches. Some of the cultural characteristics of our learners are they're going to come from all different backgrounds, races, religions, socioeconomic privileges. So it's kind of a cornucopia of veterans that are going to be in there. But one of the commonalities that's nice is a lot of the military core values are present: loyalty, faith, allegiance, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. So there's a brotherhood that would take place within the circle, as well as the majority, I would say all of the participants being English speaking as well. One of the learning styles I feel would work best, and is actually one of the primary, is kinesthetic learning, because it's hands-on. The military does a lot of learn by doing. So they'll show a soldier what needs to be done, and then that soldier in turn does it. So for an example, like learning how to disassemble and reassemble a weapon. That's a big thing. As well as oral learning. You know, we all hear that the military, they're good at giving directions and learning how to take directions. Yes, sir, no, sir. So in the case of the music therapy with drumming, the veterans will be listening to music, learning new tempos, rhythm, and what they're creating to express their emotions. Just as a reminder, again, our goal is for veterans to use drumming to work through emotional triggers that create a PTSD episode. So upon successful completion of this lesson, our veterans are going to be able to recognize the triggers that cause the release of PTSD, whether it's a sight, a sound, an odor. It could be a combination of all three of those things, but they're going to be able to recognize them and pull themselves back from having a full-blown PTSD episode. They're going to be able to compose the beats to work through emotions that arise from their PTSD trigger. So, for an example, if a veteran is, one of his triggers is fireworks, and of course, around the 4th of July, we can't avoid fireworks unless we're on a remote, deserted island, and even then, you may be able to hear them in the distance. So just for an example, for a veteran to be able to compose a beat that's going to pull him away, it may be something softer. It may be something hard and fast. So it's just going to be what works for the veteran. And last, it's going to be able to express those emotions through drumming while deviating away from self-destructive behavior. And as far as self-destructive behavior, that can be drug abuse, domestic violence, violence against themselves or others, and even suicide. So those are the things that we want to prevent. That's one of the big goals. Evaluations. To recognize triggers, each veteran will be asked a series of basic questions to see if they're currently able to recognize their emotional triggers. The veteran will be asked to keep a diary throughout the musical therapy with drumming. Drugging is what we want to get them away from, but drumming of trigger events and how they manage the emotions that were connected to the triggers. And this is going to allow me to evaluate their current attitude. For an example, which I've used before, when you hear fireworks or gunshots, how do you currently react? Anger, fear, sadness, all of the above, no emotion. Those are some of the choices. Now, working with each veteran to discern which rhythm works best for each emotion they're trying to find release for when a trigger presents itself. This is a self-expression process that is going to be different for each veteran, and the only way to evaluate this process is to listen and work with each veteran so that they can find the best way that works for them, whether it's a fast and heavy rhythm or a slow and solemn rhythm. So, again, another example, what beat will you use when you hear fireworks or gunshots to divert self-destructive behavior away from a trigger event? Some of the choices would be fast and hard, fast and soft, slow and soft, slow and hard. If other, please explain. And then for the veteran to be able to express his or her emotions through drumming, they will be using many of the techniques that they have been taught throughout the musical therapy course. They will be able to recognize their triggers by the end of the course, how to avoid them, and ways to work through them without having a breakdown, but still being able to release the emotion from any triggered event. I want to ensure that the course has helped the veteran in some aspect to help them manage their PTSD triggers from a healthier, non-destructive aspect. It is important to know if veterans or other individuals with mental health issues will benefit from this program and if any changes do need to be made. One of the examples I have for that question is, has the musical therapy with drumming assisted you in finding alternative ways to manage your trigger responses? And as you can see by the example on the slide, yes, a great deal. Yes, for most of the part, not that much, and no, not at all. And I went with yes because that provides a positive outlook. Yes, it did help. And why do you suppose that it did help? And then I want them to explain why they feel the drumming assisted them in managing their triggers. Instructional events, objective 1. Students will recognize their triggers. I want to gain the veterans' attention by giving them 2 different stories just to see what makes them tick and how they handle their emotions when something inside of them feels like a bomb is ready to go off. I think we've all been there. And an example of a story is, I was driving to work this morning. I was cut off by another driver on the way into class, and I honked my horn and I gave them a single-digit salute, and I beat on my steering wheel because I was so angry, and that's how I wanted to act on my road rage. But then there was another time where someone pulled out in front of me, and I was irritated at first, but I pulled myself back and reminded myself, okay, you've done this before to someone else. Imagine how they felt. The next thing is, I want to be able to inform the learners of the objective to discuss what triggers the fight or flight mode in them. So we're going to talk about those events and see what creates those emotions for them, and to determine what the triggers are, and to simulate prior learning by playing a video of other veterans speaking about their PTSD. Veterans need to know that they're not alone. Presenting the stimulus is, I would talk to them about my dad, who was a Vietnam veteran, and I just remember my dad always being really anxious and antsy around every first day of hunting season in Pennsylvania, whether it was small game, bear hunting, first day of doe, first day of buck, all those things that seem to have become no school days in our area. But he would just get so anxious, and what happened is it just resulted in him drinking more and more throughout the day. In fact, those first 3 days of hunting season. So it was always a big concern seeing that go on with my own father. And I just want to be able to provide the guidance for the veterans by allowing them to relax and recall their most recent trigger event. Kind of sit back, close their eyes, fall into their most recent trigger event, and attempt to talk through the emotions that are being released. And then for eliciting learner performance, it would be allowing them to recognize what caused that most recent trigger event. So for the learner to be able to recall their most recent trigger event, this is going to allow them to connect the action that rose the trigger to the surface. Was it a sight, a sound, a phrase, an odor? This will give each veteran the opportunity to recognize their triggers based on what event is taking place immediately prior to the event. And lastly, being able to provide feedback by reminding each veteran that they're not alone in this experience. And as they're sitting in that group and they're listening to other veterans speaking and sharing their stories and their experiences, hopefully it gives them a better sense of self-confidence in coming out of their shell and being able to work together as a team to support each other. Instructional events objective 2, students will learn a beat that helps them work through each trigger. So to gain their attention, I would like to be able to stand in front of the class and beat a drum, but what I'd rather do is gain their attention of the veteran by presenting the findings of a study in Israel about veterans who are able to combat PTSD through music therapy. And I want to be able to inform learners of the objective to instill that emotions can be expressed by using various beats and surfaces to resound off of. And simulating prior learning by giving a short presentation about the history of drumming, because that is important, and presenting the stimulus by showing various videos that use drumming and drums of war to express emotions. I've included a YouTube clip that I felt was pretty interesting, and providing guidance for the veterans by presenting them with a variety of sounds. So for stimulus, like a crying baby, a couple arguing, a car backfiring, fireworks, a neighbor's dog that's barking incessantly, burning some incense that just smell horrible, or introducing things that have been known to be triggers. And then elicit their learner performance by providing each one of the veterans with various drumming surfaces. I talked about this before. So it could be a plastic garbage can, a pot, a hand drum, a snare drum. Any kind of surface can be a drum. And then it's important to provide feedback by reminding each one of these veterans that there's no right or wrong surface or rhythm. Those beats that they are playing are connected to their emotions alone. Instructional events objective 3, students will express emotions through drumming while deviating away from self-destructive behaviors. To gain the veterans' attention, I will play the following video. One is an open culture video about the neuroscience behind drumming. The other two are one that hopefully everyone is familiar with. Here's a bit of a clip. Lay your weary head to rest. Don't you cry no more. And that one shows offbeat drumming a little bit, but you can listen to it. It's essentially the drummer forgets how to play and the bass is out of tune. It is definitely not a good version of a Kansas song. And the other one is one of my favorite bands, Shame on Me, but this is pretty much a drummer doing his thing, and if you look at the video, he is so focused and so intent on what he's doing. Now I'll skip forward on that a little bit to the drumming part because that is where the magic happens. So that's just giving you a better idea of, you know, the rhythm and everything that's involved in drumming and the concentration that it takes, so it deviates away from what is actually going on in the mind. It's also to inform learners. The objective during the session is to just find a positive emotional release by way of drumming, and to simulate the prior learning by recalling expressions that were used to convey emotions on drumming surfaces using different beats. And by presenting the stimulus by playing various types of music, the AC/DC was a really good example because that's just one of those songs that gets everybody going. And it's important to provide the guidance for the veterans drumming along with them to the music and encouraging them not to hold back. And eliciting learner performance is accomplished by providing each veteran with an example of one of their triggers and what they'll do to work through it by drumming out a beat. So they'll be able to share that with their counterparts in a drumming circle. And there's no right or wrong feedback for this class because each individual and their experiences are unique. Instructional activities objective 1 is to recognize triggers that cause the release of PTSD. To present the stimulus material, I'll begin with non-linguistic representations by utilizing 2 of the 4 methods, illustrations and animations, along with sound. These are 2 videos that are from YouTube. Please feel free to watch them. One is a sound clip, and just for the record, it's very hard to find a war sound clip from any movies nowadays that do not carry profanity, so I apologize for the very somnolence of this one. And the other is a dramatic war cartoon. Not a lot of sound to it, but it's very provoking, so I'd encourage anyone who has the time to watch it. And one of the reasons is studies show that sights and sounds are powerful triggers to those who suffer from PTSD. And there are some veterans that have a better idea of what their triggers are, but there are others that are newer veterans home from war that are actually still struggling with trying to conceptualize what their triggers are at this point. So I feel that this would work very well for them, and after the review of each method, the veteran will be asked to use a reflective writing process. So essentially what they're going to be doing throughout this course is journaling. Instructional activity objective 2 is to compose beats to work through emotions that arise from PTSD triggers. And this objective will involve the use of encouraging success by enacting the pause, prompt, and praise method. So whenever a veteran reaches an impasse or encounters questions or is having troubles with breakthroughs, the instructor will stop and recognize the event and use the 3P method to work through any of the scenarios. So for example, Veteran Bob feels that he's emotionally stalled and he cannot find a beat to release his emotions. So I would pause and sit with Bob and place a hand on his drum while having an animated conversation and using a light beat that's in sync with our conversation. The time would be taken to work through what can be done to help Bob find success. In the process of having each student generate and test a hypothesis on how they will react to triggers will allow them to draw new conclusions and new composition of beats to provide a higher level of what does and does not work for managing their triggers. So again, another example is veteran Jane feels that whenever she hears fireworks, she'll not be able to find a beat to work through the trigger event. So I have her write this down in her journal, and then I'll have Jane listen to quiet recordings of fireworks noises and give her the opportunity to slowly work her way into the emotions that are involved in this trigger while she composes her beat. Just-in-time teaching can be combined with these methods, as it's imperative to be able to meet the immediate emotional needs of each veteran. So, for example, veteran Joe is confused about the connection between triggers and composing drum beats, and veteran Mike wants to know what the best surfaces for drumming are when he's scared. And at this point, the time can be taken to answer these questions and provide examples. And again, as we did previously, this is going to be followed up with the reflective writing process. And each veteran is going to continue to take and journal their responses on the emotional turmoil that took place for them and how they wanted to respond. Instructional activities, objective 3. Express emotions through drumming while deviating away from self-destructive behavior. For this learning objective, the stimuli used would be a combination of what has been used from the previous two objectives with the addition of instructional games so that veterans can practice the skills they've learned, identify ways to increase their strengths, and develop new methods. It also allows them to work together as a team. And one of the examples would be to sit in a drumming circle, just put on some music, and let the veterans beat out their frustrations that they've experienced during the day. At some point, the rhythm would become uniform, and they would be working together as a team without actually realizing it. Veterans can be rewarded with small incentives. For example, positive attitudes would be rewarded with coffee and donuts. A veteran showing empathy towards another could enjoy a gift card. Age never seems to matter when it comes to receiving positive recognition. We all get excited about it. I know they could give me a pencil at work and I would be so happy just for having done something right, whether it was being a good teammate or customer recognition. And following the same process of journaling, after the review method, each veteran will be asked to do that reflective writing in their journal and just write down what took place and how they felt about everything that took place during this instructional activity. The formative evaluation begins with a design review where you would conduct a needs analysis, conduct a formal needs assessment amongst the veterans, review of the environment and learner analysis, and identify and restructure objectives and goals should the need arise. For example, if a non-veteran is in the class, could it be beneficial to create a secondary class for non-veterans or just have it focused mainly on veterans with PTSD or other agitated mental health disorders? Next would be the expert review, and you would want to use people that are familiar with working with veterans and PTSD. And so you would want a veterans health medical professional, since they are the primary caregivers for the majority of veterans. You could even use a doctor from a military treatment facility, since they're also familiar with PTSD and mental health disorders related to wartime trauma. A civilian mental health professional could also be utilized for the review, as well as a musical therapy specialist. The learner validations are one-on-one, small group, field trial, pilot test. One-on-one can be used for the intake for each veteran as well as the exit interview. Small group could be made up of anywhere from 6 to 10 veterans, and just get some input from them on how comfortable they are, what they think of the program, the willingness, and the interest. And then the field trial pilot test would be initiating a small group in order to see how the drumming with music to drum away PTSD would go. For example, starting off with a small group of veterans who may not feel comfortable in large groups for a small group setting. Ongoing evaluation would be the long-term follow-up with the veterans who have participated in the program and to see how they are doing and what the success rate of their self-control over their triggers are. And then assessments prior to and after the flagship program to determine what the success rate is and if it's worth pursuing. The summative evaluation starts with reactions, and this would be completed through a survey and questionnaire interview. The process will involve the creation of a survey that focuses on 3 sections: overall input of the feeling of personal success for each veteran, the format of the course, and the input of how the course can be improved for future veterans. Next is learning. Skills observation can be captured through each individual veteran's triggers being played, shown, or presented, and allowing the veteran several common surface options to display the beat that they have composed for themselves that aids in detracting the emotions away from the trigger itself and putting it into a tangible surface for emotional release. Transfer or behavior. Action planning and questionnaire interview will involve a compilation of interview questions for each veteran to determine how they plan to use the skills learned over the duration of the course when an event triggers PTSD emotion, and by keeping an action plan in place to continue to grow upon learned skills on controlling emotional breaks related to PTSD. Results. Action learning would be direct observations of veterans working together as a team, learning that there is strength in numbers, they are not alone in the struggle to manage PTSD, display of empathy to others, and willingness to help. And overall, having learned how to identify their triggers, have an action plan in place, and utilize the tools they've been presented with in order to bring the triggers in and keep them at bay to avoid a full-blown PTSD event.